Welcome to this episode of the Million Dollar Mastermind. I'm Larry Weidel, and before we get started, if you want to know exactly how to win again and again, go to weidelonwinning.com/webinar now to watch something I've put together for you. Now let's get going into this episode of Million Dollar Mastermind. We're here talking with Jessica Chang, and Jessica has done something unbelievable in the arena of child care and is created a network, the largest child care network in the United States. And they're really just getting started from what I hear. She's got an app that connects parents with home daycare owners. She's helped make a mental breakthrough that's going through companies now that they need to, the employers of all sizes need to get involved in cost effectively offering employees and team members support for their child care needs. And as a result, they're growing incredibly fast and attracting a lot of attention. So Jessica, thanks for taking time to talk. And how did you get your early experience? You said when you decided you saw this need, started with a personal problem, you started, basically you identified a niche. It was big, it was important. And you said, I had a lot of skills, even though I was not in the childcare business. I had experience putting companies together, projects together, making things happen, running companies, financials. Where did you get that experience? How did you get those tools?
So I started off actually as an investment banker early on, and
how do you start as an investment banker? What does that mean?
When I graduated college,
where'd you go to college?
I went to UC Berkeley.
UC Berkeley. And so Are you talking to me from California now?
I am talking to you from California.
Okay, we've got to put that California filter on everything.
But I actually grew up out of country. So I actually grew up as a expat in China. And one of the things is I'm growing up in Beijing. It's really cold, and when I was applying for college, I remember my dad distinctively saying, look, you could either be on the East Coast or on the West Coast, but I can tell you the West Coast is a lot warmer.
Yeah.
And that was a big push for me. But I think the other thing that my dad had always said to me, and why I was so determined to kind of get into finance early on, was financial independence. And my dad said, he was like, look, there's a lot of jobs out there, but finance actually gives you financial independence. And you do the number of years that you should do, and you might like it. But if you don't, you have the ability to kind of choose where you want to go next. And I took that to heart and started off in investment banking because of what my dad said. Though those were the longest days I've ever had, and probably the hardest. It really put into me that mentality of working hard, and working hard and using that to really understand what it means to be to go after something that you really truly want, and how much effort you're going to put towards it. And that was ingrained in me.
And from the beginning, what kind of work that you were doing that was so challenging and so hard that you had to master as an investment banker?
I don't think that the work was that hard per se. It was just you were expected to learn very quickly and do a lot of projects at the same time. So a normal job might be hey, look, you've got 6 months to get up to speed, and you're going to work on one project at a time. In investment banking, they were look, you've got 2 weeks to learn it. If you don't learn it, then you're going to be spending time working on it until 2 to 3 a.m. every day. So the faster you learn, the earlier you get to go home. And
When you say learn something, what are you learning?
yeah, at
An
that time, as
industry or a company or a what?
you're learning both. You're learning industry. I was in tech M&A, so tech mergers and acquisitions. You're learning industry. You're also learning a way to analyze companies. Um, you're learning companies by themselves. So any like mergers that were happening, you were getting fully integrated in what the company was doing, how they made money, how they actually reported their financials, what types of things were useless for the company where they're not making money. How do you like what synergies did they have with another company that they needed to merge or be acquired by? So, and that was happening all the time. And it wasn't one project that you were doing, it's like 20 at the same time. So you need to context switch very quickly as well.
And what does that mean? Context very well.
Context switch, it just meant that like, hey, look, you might be working on an acquisition of a media site by another media company. And then the next project, which you have to kind of context switch, meaning like really think about it differently, is hey, you're working on a matchmaking company and they're thinking about going IPO. So it's like very different, very different skill sets, very different research that needs to be done. How you're approaching it, the way you analyze it has to be completely different. So that was also something investment banking really did teach me well, is like that context switching is very important as you become a CEO later on in life, right? It's like you have to think about, hey, 1 minute you might be talking to your employees about, hey, what kind of employer benefits that they want to actually have, or talking to your customer to the next making big decisions for how the company is going to grow 3 or 5 years down the line.
Now, you were learning this, getting the projects where you were learning about, so you would help sell the company, or you'd help upgrade the company, or take the company public, or help them raise another round of funding, or what were your
Yeah.
projects? You said you'd somehow be working on 20 different things at once.
Yeah. So it could be something like a merger, or like that company wants to acquire a company in the media space. So give me 10 different companies that fit into my criteria of acquisition. To, hey, this company wants to go public, so they want to raise a public round through an IPO. Or this company is looking to raise debt capital. And so you have to figure out what type of debt they should raise and what's it going to cost them to raise that capital. So I would say within the context of advisory work, that's essentially what you were doing.
And hard to focus on that if you're worried about childcare, I guess.
Yes, at that time I didn't have children. It was very early on, but I, you know, I can, as an employee that had childcare issues myself, that the last thing you want to think about or worry about is where my children are going to be, right? That
Right.
is a fundamental issue before you can think about anything else. So, for example, like let's say you are that hourly employee and you're working at a McDonald's, right? You might have a second or third shift, but your employer needs you to be there every single day. The last thing that you're going to be thinking about is, well, how am I going to do this job if I don't have anyone looking after my kids?
Right.
Or even so, like if I don't have anyone looking at my kids, how do I even progress in my career, right? Like I know McDonald's probably offers like continuous education for their employees, but you can't even do that continuous education if you don't have time because you're taking care of your kids.
Well, the other thing is it, there's a lot of luxury associated with a lifestyle of working in the financial industry, and all these big companies and big dollars and big projects and mergers and fancy office buildings and expensive lunches and travel and hotel. And now you're clean. And then it's a big step to get so passionate about your idea for childcare that you find yourself a little while down the road scrubbing toilets. Hey, listen, there's a lot of information online, but there aren't a lot of people who've actually done something. In my case, I've actually built a successful business that's accrued over $5 billion in assets under management and has done well even during trying times. Now, if you want to know exactly how I've done this, go to whiteelementwinning.com/webinar now. I've compressed a decade of learning into 5 short weeks just for those of you who want to give yourself an incredible advantage and are tired of waiting and watching others move up.
Well, there was definitely a number of years in between that because I went from finance to operations, being an operator at a company, then stepping into becoming like a tech entrepreneur, right? Like
Now,
meaning work.
what's that mean? You're an operator of a company. They bring you in like, this, she knows more about it than we do. We're going to bring her in as a consultant. Just let her run this division or this section or something like that. Is that what that was?
Yeah, so I think it ends up usually becoming like the way that you get there is, hey, you've worked in finance and you've ended up building a rapport with a company and you've advised them on larger strategic things that they should do. And then they're like, well, why don't you come work for us? And why don't you help us like do the execution on all those advice that you've given us? And that's actually when you find out it's a lot harder like to give advice than to actually take that advice and execute it.
And hence, Jessica, who I choose to get on this podcast.
Yes. And
people who have made that jump and realized that, and so what things, like when you went in and now you're running a project, what's your recollection of that were like eye-opening experiences for you?
I think the hardest one that I had to do was, and this was after investment banking, I went and jumped over on the private equity side. So the difference on that is you're given advice to, you're taking advice and you're the one that holds the money, right? And you're making those decisions. So one of the things was, I remember this distinctively, we were buying a asset management firm, and this was like a year or two after like the Great Recession. And I remember going in like, hey, look, this is why we should buy. Here are the synergies that's going to create for our own fund. And we've got to cut out a bunch of like sectors in this company, not sectors, a bunch of divisions in this company because they're not making any money anymore. Like the Great Recession just completely killed those divisions.
Right.
And then they're like, yeah, we should do this. Now, by the way, you're going to integrate the company, and now it's your job to go fire half of those employees. I had like literally got a panic attack week 1 of 4 weeks that I had to spend at the company firing people. Like literally I fired like every single day. My job was to fire 20 people, and it was horrendous. Like I never felt like the worst person in the world. Like people are yelling at you. People are really making you feel like you're the worst person that they've ever met. And I think that's when like I really kind of understood from that point, like it's easier to make suggestions, but it's way harder to actually have to execute on those suggestions.
By the way, did that company, after you went through that downsize, let's call it politely downsizing and everything, did the company do well?
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
Yes, it did.
I mean, sometimes you have to prune, you know what I'm saying? And that's why, those of y'all listening to this thing, you got to look out for yourself because, industry changes, the economy changes, things are being invented all the time. Politicians will screw things up. Sometimes CEOs will screw things up. You got to look out for yourself, and you've got to have your options and not just be a Pollyanna as you go through the day thinking this job is always going to be here for me. I'll get a decent pay raise, and, my pension will be definitely there for me. You got to look down the road and look out for yourself. And those of y'all thinking about starting your own business, or maybe you're in that now and going through nightmares trying to make it work, need to remind yourself that it is worth it because you're taking control of your life. And the fight you're fighting is for your financial freedom, and to where you don't have to be in a position that you could be a victim of some kind of tectonic plates shifting in the economy. And all of a sudden, not only are you out, I remember I got a loan up in North Carolina on a house. We decided we're going to make a big addition onto our house. So I go down to the private equity thing of the bank, and they love anything Larry wanted. Unbelievable, and you're our preferred customer, whatever. Well, they said, go ahead and let's just do this. Get your first strike at it. I didn't know what it was going to cost. They said, we'll give you $250,000 for the first part of the construction addition, and then go through that, and then you'll know what it's going to take to finish it. Come on back down, and we'll give you the rest of it. Well, by the time, Jessica, we went down to get the rest of it, everybody in that department had been fired. The whole exclusive elite client division gone. And I called him up and I said, $200,000 and deposits going through your account. This was like, I don't know, late 80s. I said, $200,000 in deposits going through your bank. Losing that doesn't matter. I don't matter to you. And they say, no, not really. In their grand scheme of things. So, don't take things for granted. Look out for yourself. And so as you moved on from that, then you moved on from operations into what did you say?
Startups. So I think what was really interesting for me is I had so much experience with larger companies and really being like a real operator. Like, okay, it's not like truly it's like, hey, this is how you make the day-to-day operations work and how like point A gets to point Z. I kind of looked and said like, hey, tech companies can really learn from that experience, right? Like, how do you actually monetize instead of just growing and not figuring out how to make money? Right. And I really started to like that too, because if you could think about these things when you're just starting out as a company, you might not have to backpedal like 4 or 5 years down the road, right? Like if you thought about how to become a profitable company from day one, you can actually try to get to that profitability versus, well, I've grown so big, now my business model actually doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, all of this turned into priceless and actually necessary experience for what you did. And I want to get into how you exploded this thing. And it seems like when did you put the app out, Jessica?
So we spent most of 2017 building it. So the first person that actually started using it was in 2018. It was like, I remember this, like Jan 1st of 2018.
Yeah. Well, I want to be able to ask you a little bit more about that next time we talk. If you enjoyed what you've heard and are dead serious about finding out for yourself exactly how this works in the real world, I've taken the most valuable business lessons I've learned over 40 years and put them into something for you to watch. Go to whiteelementing.com/webinar now in order to move up as fast as possible. I'm Larry Weidel, and I run the $1 Million Mastermind. Go, go, go.